basically have seen in the last few years so many lies, blatant lies, and misrepresentation of facts, censorship continually through the mainstream media, and they have been one of the biggest casualties of this information war because people simply don't trust the mainstream media anymore. A new media is emerging as we've seen the rise of many different influencers, many different activists, many different people who are coming forward with a message of truth. And basically the next presenter, Ethan Nash, has been doing this for a long time. Ethan's one of the youngest people here, and he's in his 20s, and he's had this calling for a very long time. He built his first website, I found out yesterday, when he was 14. And he is the editor of Tot News. So we really want to get behind Ethan because he's very grounded in an analytical approach, factual content. It's very balanced, and he's basically having the specific ability to see through the facade and the manipulation and the misinformation. So it's really important that we support the alternative news for someone like Ethan as much as we possibly can, but not only just go to his website, get on his socials, but actually support it financially, because when you actually support something financially, you send the market a signal that this can be viable in terms of employment, because Ethan, just like all the rest of us, has bills to pay, and he does this full time. So any financial support that any of us can give to Ethan and what he's doing, it helps actually strengthen the light, because it actually helps to strengthen the alternative media and get the message out of what's really happening on this planet in terms of geopolitics, all the financial, social, political, environmental issues that we're faced with today, without this distortion of facts or this manipulation and the social engineering that we've seen very clearly over the last 3 years. So I want you guys to give a really big hand and give as much support as you can to Ethan, because he's a man on a mission, and he's here today to talk about everything and anything. Please make welcome Ethan Nash.
Boy, oh boy. Boy, oh boy. Can everyone hear me? All good? Awesome. What an introduction. Thank you, Anthony. Can everyone give Anthony and the whole team a round of applause for everything they're doing here? I mean, what a setup here. That was quite the introduction. Yes, I've been doing this for a while in the alternative media space, and I hope to talk about some of that here today, but also talk about some of the larger themes of the world that I've sort of uncovered on my journey, and not even necessarily uncovered, that might have been sort of coded and given to us, and the similarities that a lot of us have in this movement, because we're seeing that there is, Anthony mentioned this yesterday, there is almost a convergence of a lot of different scenes now. You know, the spiritual people are a little bit more truther-minded, and truthers are starting to become a little bit more spiritual and not let the information get them down. And I think that we're all on similar journeys, and I think that there is definitely a distinction between the path that the world is going and the path that we're going. I think that they're two separate things, and I want to talk about that here today. And as a little bit of an intro, I started TOTT News, most people call it Tot News, back in 2011. As Anthony mentioned, I was 14 at the time. I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a journalist. I romanticised this idea of the old school journalist, you know, someone that had the notepad and the hat and would question governments and hold people to account and powers to account. And unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. And I learnt this because I'd awoken to 9/11 and was interested in conspiracies like Area 51 and all this stuff. But as I said, I still romanticise this concept of a journalist doing what's right for society and reporting on what's going on and observing and warning. And so I trained to become a journalist at the Queensland State Library. They did a citizen journalist program there, and I was trained by a Clarion Award winning journalist. But when I was there, they were literally just telling you how to induce fear onto the public, to keep them attentive, to manipulate their public opinion. And for me, I didn't like that. And it was also coupled with this notion that literally anything that you would pitch, say it might have been the increase in public transport costs. Oh no, we can't do a story like that because the Queensland government funds this program, Ethan. We can't criticise the government, even something as small as public transport prices. And so this led me, I was already sort of awakened to the world, but these two things obviously just led me to start this website so I could fulfil my dream of doing this romanticised journalist that doesn't even exist anymore, and also to hold people to account. So we cover issues like geoengineering, vaccines, mass surveillance, big pharma, you know, the general themes that are out there. But I did this website, and over the years, what's happened it's definitely grown in size because people have realised that a lot of the things that I've been speaking about have started to manifest in the world. So a couple of examples. You might see there on the left, this was published in 2018 by myself, no jab, no job, the next step of the vaccine debate. And then on the right there, you can see a whole bunch of stories about people fighting back against mandates just a few years later. I was involved with the early pro-choice movement, vaccine movement, when the no jab, no pay laws come out for daycare centres and whatnot. And so I learnt that world, and I thought, if we can be coerced sort of against our will, that's, for medical decisions, that's going to be a very dark path if that ever ends up like that. And as we all know, it's sort of come true. In April of 2020, 1 month after coronavirus had been officially declared, I wrote an article saying that one day questioning COVID-19 will become thought crime. And fast forward a few years later on the right there, and we can see that this has now been revealed, the censorship industrial complex that we've seen. Thousands of social media posts censored and hidden. You probably had shared some that was fact-checked and told was misinformation. Could immunity passports soon be coming to the world in May of 2020? I was just watching the news and watching the way that Bill Gates was speaking, and you could just see that vaccine passports would become a reality. And I published that in May of 2020. If you see the second one there, November 2020, later in the year, mainstream media was still publishing that vaccine passports are only for fantasy land. Fast forward a little bit later on the right, and vaccine passports were introduced in Australia. And this one's my favourite. Back in 2013, Australian science prepares for pandemic. We published that on the website, and now I didn't think it was going to be as hectic as it was, right? I mean, I thought it'd just be another type of Ebola type of scare, but you can see that just with these examples, people have seen, you know, this is someone that's trying to publish good journalism and try and forecast the future and try and see where things are going like a journalist should do. And so that's what I've done, and it's obviously gained a lot of traction over the years, particularly during the COVID time. But one of the things I do on the website as well is I try to peel back the layers just a little bit more, just beyond the news, and look at how the deceptions of the world really keep people in a state of almost a hallucinogenic mesmerisation about everything that they know about themselves, the world, and I call this the phantasm. And if you see the definition of a phantasm, an image formed by the mind and supposed to be real or material, a shadowy or airy appearance, sometimes an optical illusion, a phantom, a dream. That's the definition of phantasm. And this is sort of what collective society as a whole exists in, this phantasm where they all believe these myths and lies and just go about that as their reality when it really isn't true reality at all. And there's 4 parts that hold this together, the phantoms of reality, I call them. War theatre, which that's really the pinnacle of mass media manipulation. it's one thing to induce fear and write nonsense stories, but convincing people about the operational mode of war through television screens in a true Baudrillardian sense is the pinnacle of mass media manipulation. We see it going on with the Ukraine war now. The history hoax, where do we come from? That's a big one, it speaks for itself. The space deception, where are we? What are those bright lights in the sky really? Is it what we've been told in our history books, in our classrooms? And then the medical hoax, which people, I think, have realised the magnitude of in the last few years, this synthesisation of nature that really started with allopathic medicine in the late 1800s, and how they've just sold nature back to us, but have added everything to keep us addicted, to turn us into customers, and now it's enforcing itself on the world almost like a bio-fascist state. It's not the fascists anymore, they're bio-fascists. It's a next level in the modern age, which includes genetic engineering and all these types of things. So I talk about this and I try to make reference to describe that all of this is in place because it's leading you could say the 3D realm to the brave new world order. That's what I call it. It's not the new world order, it's the brave new world order, and it's a little bit different from the Orwellian world that most people think that we're going into. It's a slave system that's built on consumerism, on keeping people addicted to things, keeping them in a constant worship of the state, and you've got an ailment, take a soma pill. This is the brave new world order of over-consumerism that people are going into, that they're actually calling out for. In 1932, Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World, and this pretty much described the bio-fascist state that has arisen today, a completely technocratic state that's controlled by pleasures. And there's no more parents anymore, no more natural births, and everyone has medicine at their disposal if they feel angry or they feel something like this. And most people think this is just what a great dystopian tale. But if you understand the Huxley family, Thomas Huxley, Aldous's grandfather, was Darwin's bulldog. He was practically the man that got the theory of evolution over in the late 1800s. And as we know, the theory of evolution, a lot of researchers have spoken about this, it really was this natural selection mindset of the eugenics state that would emerge through the 30s and then would be reinvented to the modern day. It was all started with that almost split in the way people saw the world. You're no longer the centre of the world, you no longer come from a divine being, you come from a monkey. Don't question it. And that's it, just a monkey. And you evolved from that monkey. Aldous's brother Julian Huxley, he was the one that reinvented eugenics in the modern age, eugenics modernisation. This new state that we're seeing today, once Hitler took eugenics too far, which he just borrowed from the United States, they said, well, we'll just do it covertly now. Through medicines and through mass media, we will convince people to do it to themselves. And so this is the brave new world order, and at the heart of this is what I call the epsilon agenda, the intergenerational creation of a post-human slave class. I had the great pleasure of my article being the leading story for New Dawn magazine last year on this subject, and in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, the epsilons are they're humans that have been, because everything's controlled by, like a conveyor belt is where people are born on, and it's all computers. And what they do is they intentionally make a certain class called the epsilons that are just smart enough to do the jobs, but are dumb enough to question why they're there. And they create this by actually starving the oxygen in their blood. Now, if you remember some of the chats yesterday about oxygen and blood being starved, you can see that it's not as science fiction-y as you think. This is a real agenda that is happening today, and it's continued through birth trauma, modern medicine, ultrasounds, all this type of stuff. But this is what we're staring down, but when we're staring down this, we're observing through our eyes, aren't we? And unlike most, we have the eyes to see this type of thing carrying out. And I always try to make the distinction between us and them. And I know people will say, oh, Ethan, it's not good to separate yourself from the normies and the normie masses and say you're different to them. We're all one and it's all peaceful. And I don't have time to go into it today, but there's a lot of literature that talks how we're different, how over 70% of people don't have an inner voice in their head. They don't talk to themselves through the day. People don't process information linguistically. They process it through images, almost like emojis. Whereas I would assume that most people in this room don't do either of those things. They're talking to themselves all day. So I think there is a difference between us and them, and not even in a bad way, not even in a separatist way, more in a comforting way, to solve the answers as to why won't people wake up? Why won't these people wake up? Why don't they just understand? And it's because somehow we've been given the eyes to see. Now, when I started my website in 2011, 2030 was ages away. For me, it was like, oh, we don't have to worry about that. And now we're in 2023, we're going on the final stretch, everything's sort of transforming. But I don't think that we share the same fate as the people that are going into this brave new world order agenda. And that's something that I always try to make clear, because we don't have to be afraid of this, because this isn't happening to us. And why do we have the eyes to see? I explore a lot of possibilities. They talk about potentially we're predisposed to political beliefs through our genetics. What about doppelgangers, people that look alike, but they don't just look alike, they act alike as well? Are we all just in some big intergalactic TV show like The Truman Show? You know what would be the worst part about that if that was the case? Imagine if our ratings sucked. Imagine if we're on at like 2 a.m. on a Monday morning because we're about to get cancelled. No, I don't want that. I want to be prime time, baby, if that's the case. And even deeper concepts, are we harvested by entities that are bigger than us? This was a TOTT illustrator, Steve Hunter, did this recently. You can see the sexual energy and the mind energy. And again, this isn't happening to us, it's just something that we're observing. And so when I think about all of these things, and I think about the role that we play, I always think, well, why do we have the eyes to see and most people don't? And for me, I've found that a lot of it comes through code. Like a lot of this journey that I've been on hasn't even necessarily been my choice. And I want to talk about that a little bit because I feel like a lot of you here are the same. And I love the field of synchro-mysticism, exploring coincidence in numbers, but not just coincidences, meaningful coincidences, things that are beyond coincidences, and how does that sort of map out, and how can you trace these sorts of things, not just for yourself, but also for the world as well. And so, my father was born on 9/11, September 11th. And not just that, he was turning 33 years old on 9/11, the year I was born. My nan was born in 1932, the year that Brave New World was published, a book that would change my life forever. Both of these things, like I didn't come out of the womb questioning 9/11. I didn't read Brave New World at 3 years old, but in hindsight, I look back and go, hang on, look at all of these codes. And it's not just for individual codes. So I enjoy exploring the codes in the world and events around us. Corona, 6 letters, value of 66. Is that just a coincidence? What about Event 201? As we know, the pandemic preparation. They had a meeting. What would happen if a pandemic happened in October of 2019? What's the odds that if you put William Henry Gates, Bill Gates' full name, into a gematria calculator, it also equals 201? Is this just a coincidence? On the screen there, the top screenshot is the date, September 11th of 2020, first year of the pandemic. What are the odds that on that date, the total number of deaths worldwide for coronavirus was 911,000 people? As we know, the origin of corona comes from the word crown. And the Queen, she obviously died last year, the crown, this symbolic thing. And coronavirus was declared a pandemic on March 11th, 2020. We call it 3/11. That's a whole different rabbit hole. But what are the odds that between March 11th, 2020 and the date that the Queen died on the 8th of September, 2022, 911 days. You can type that into Google, what's the date between 11th March and 8th of September. And not just that, a few days later, King Charles, his reign was made official here in Australia on September 11th. That's the Sunday Times newspaper right there from September 11th, just a few days after. So how much does a coincidence have to be a coincidence before you realise it's not a coincidence? How much coding is in the world that we don't really understand? This right here, this will be the last example I show. What you're seeing there is the car that Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in, which started World War I. Now, the number plate that you see there, it's blown up on the right there, says A111118. Now, as we know, the 11th of the 11th, 1918 is Remembrance Day, Armistice Day, the day that ended World War I. So what are the odds that the car that was driving the man that got assassinated to start the war had a number plate of the date that ended the war 4 years later? Is this, again, all just a coincidence? And so one thing I like is that Anthony used this notion, rite of passage. Why do we have the eyes to see? Why can we see these types of codes in the world and where things are going? And I like to explore those concepts too. We see a lot the twin pillar symbology all through the world, not just used by Freemasons, but almost encoded in the world. There's always the twin pillars, and the secret third pillar is always the revelation, the third pillar. And for me, I believe, the moon landing generation and the 9/11 generation, they were intergenerational twin pillars where there was no other events where more people were watching a single event around the world. The moon landing, 600 million people at the time, was huge, and everyone saw 9/11. Everyone saw those towers coming down. And a lot of us were woken through these events over multiple generations, and it's almost like preparing for 3/11 at the bottom there, the third pillar, this corona period. If you didn't see the deceptions from that entire time period, signified by the moon landing generation and the 9/11 generation, then you wouldn't see the deceptions that were coming up for the big one, 3/11. And so I wonder why we've obviously been drawn to these things, why we're going through these things. And on one hand, it seems like we're in this place where one part is going one way, but at the same time, there's a transformation towards a brave new world. People are awakening more than ever, but things have never been as bad as ever. And it's almost this interesting time period where I wonder what the cycles are. People talk about, is it Chinese fate calculation? Is it the Kali Yuga cycles? Could be all of these things. I entertain a lot of possibilities, but we're definitely going through this transformation now, almost like an organism that needs to split apart to make itself better. And again, that's that distinction. You know, maybe not everyone is going to come with us to the new world that we create. Or if you believe we're going to go to another realm or we're going to ascend, whatever your belief systems are, does that really include everyone else? Or are we just in this period where we're going through this? We have the eyes to see. And if you don't, well then you have to go through the cycle again, or whatever the message may be. And through this time, like I want to stress that there's a lot of challenges that are going to come. They already have come. And we shouldn't be so naive to think that there are no challenges, especially the fact that there are forces out there that don't want you to evolve through this period. They want to keep you in this box. They want to keep you in a state of consumerism and pleasure and overconsumption so that you can be the perfect, post-human slave. And I've experienced it myself. We've been attacked by the fact checkers for conspiracy, bushfire claims, for COVID misinformation. My interview with Pete Evans was torn off the shelves in New Zealand. It's not up there, but that's another example from the New Dawn magazine. So we've been attacked by these people, and this is what I want to talk about sort of in my presentation today, is what is the role for us moving forward as free thinkers, as we navigate this big shift, as we navigate this time where a lot of our things are being attacked and questioned. And a few examples for, I suppose, the crowd here. In 2019, I titled it The End of Natural Medicine in Australia, but this was the time where they ended rebates for natural health. You may remember this. No more yoga rebates, no more. They just said there's no evidence to support that these alternative therapies have any benefit. Alternative magazines pulled from the shelves. That was an alternative health magazine during the pandemic. What Doctors Won't Tell You, it was called. Pulled from the shelves. And in New South Wales, just last year, the HCCC has been given powers to shut down alternative health clinics if they so choose. So it's not as if we can go through this period without challenges, but at the same time, I almost believe that if you peel back the layers even more, these challenges are just given to us so we can evolve, so we can do this. We need to be challenged in that way so that we can step up and navigate how the future is going to work, because they do have the perfect system now. As Aldous Huxley said, there will be in the next generation or so a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing a dictatorship without tears, so to speak. Producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but they'll enjoy it. And this was a quote he said in 1952 at a Berkeley speech. This is how long ago this system has been generating and developing, obviously backed by sort of pharmacological methods. But through this process, being called thought criminals and our ways of thinking being attacked, what does this really mean? What does this period signify? And as we know, the word apocalypse, actually etymologically speaking, means unveiling. What is being unveiled to us right now? And there's been a lot that has been unveiled to us during this period. And so what I wanted to focus on is how are we going to navigate through this time? What does all of this mean for us? As there's still going to be a test, a rite of passage, as Anthony puts it. So how do we navigate this? Well, I think it's all about finding your own purpose, which a lot of people in this room have. The purpose of a life is a life with a purpose. I love that quote. And everyone's purpose is different. Some of the incredible harp sounds that were being played yesterday, healers, a lot of people here have found their purpose, but if you're someone that hasn't, I would encourage you to try and be a little bit more proactive. Don't just be a consumer or someone that buys things or is, a consumer of the scene. try and find your own purpose, because it's going to take all of us for the future. It's going to take all of us working together to weather the storm. And it's not about rejecting the world around us, it's about projecting the world that we want to see. As one world crumbles, it's on us to envision what the new world's going to look like, instead of focusing all the time on how it's all coming down. We need to focus on the new world that we create. And so I am very inspired by, trying to find a purpose. And for me, I document things. This is what I think my purpose is. I'm trying to make sure that whatever happens, it will survive for generations, right? And I think that's when I talk about the role of free thinkers, I think that's the most important thing to begin with, is preservation. Everyone's focused on everything that we're thinking, but there could be a day when what you're thinking is not allowed anymore. And then how do you ensure that that survives into the future? How do you ensure that this continues? And I'm very inspired, I document things. I want to ensure that a lot of this can continue on. I had the great pleasure of interviewing Wendy Skerr. And Wendy Skerr, if you don't know who she is, she was in the cafe at Port Arthur on the day that, as she describes, a team of people entered into the cafe to massacre everyone. It's a pretty gruesome story that I heard directly from her mouth, and the reason she wanted to do an interview with us and gave us all of her court documents and all of her papers that she had, because it was towards the end of her life, it was one of her last interviews. What she said to me is, this needs to go to the digital age. If I die with all of this, no one's ever going to know. And for me, it just feels like my purpose is to try and document, to try and make sure that the same way that I found books from 70 years ago, maybe 70 years from today, someone will find my books or our work and say, hang on a minute, things didn't used to be like this. And I'm really inspired by this story. Some of the members of my website have heard this already, so I apologise, but in the 1400s, Greece, I've got Greek heritage, so I'm always inspired by Greek stories. Greece was conquered by the Ottoman Empire in the mid-1400s. And the Ottoman Empire ruled Greece for 400 years with an iron fist. It wasn't until the 1800s that the people of Greece had their revolution and were able to restore their society. But how were they able to do that? And this story is very powerful, because when the Ottomans ruled Greece, if you can see there in the second photo, the people of Greece would still gather in underground churches, in tunnels, in the mountains, out of sight, whatever they needed to do, and continue to teach their kids their language, their philosophies, their way of life, the Greek way of life. 400 years, could you imagine that? And when they were finally ready and the revolution happened in the 1800s, they went back like nothing had happened, because they held on to their culture even though there was an empire that was trying to destroy it and trying to eradicate what that theory of democracy was from the world. And think about that, 400 years, that's a lot of generations. You're teaching your kids and you're hoping that they teach their kids and their kids and their kids, but what an inspiring story that is in terms of how you can keep ideas alive. And I think preservation is such a key for us as free thinkers, is how can we ensure that this information, even if people all do ascend and split off and go to another reality, another dimension, what about the people that are still left here? Which I think there still will be. There needs to be something for other people that then go through their journey as well, because this is a long game. The headlines of today are meant for the generations of tomorrow. So if you look at all of these corona headlines and everything, millions of people have died, and we all look at it and we laugh at these headlines, but these headlines aren't meant for us. They're meant for 70 years from now, people looking in the newspapers going, oh my God, look how terrible it was then. Look at all the threat that these anti-vaxxers almost caused to society. The same way that we look back 70 years ago and say, oh, look at all these things that happened. When people back then were probably laughing, going, no, it's not like that at all. The headlines of today are meant for the generations of tomorrow, so it's a long game. You've got to ensure that somehow this continues to survive. And I guess in addition to preservation, finding your own purpose, there is an element of community, and that's what we're all doing here. When the Great Depression happened in the 1930s, and there's a great book by Joan Beaumont, Australia's Great Depression, she talks about a stoic nation in the 30s that even though there was depression, nobody was really poor. We had an abundance of food. You knew your neighbours. Everyone, if you didn't have something, there was food banks in the middle of the street, people handing out food. That's what helped Australia and the rest of the world survive the Great Depression. We don't have that anymore as a society. Nobody knows their neighbour anymore. Nobody talks to anyone. There's not that societal unit like there used to be. But there can be for our communities. Just little things like this were so big to help people survive, and that's why they've tried so hard to get rid of these skills like growing food and being self-reliant and not reliant on corporate chains, because they know people can survive. That even though we might go through a Great Depression, we're still rich in the soul, even though we're poor in the consumer market, you know. And so this is how things are going to go, you know. You've got to look at the long span and the short term side of things. There's different cycles that happen in the world. As we know, the age of an empire is only roughly 250 years on average through history. 250 years is all an empire lasts, and America just past 250 years, I believe. I think they're at 253, so I don't know if that tells you anything. And also world reserve currencies, they only last about 94 years. And what are we going through now? Digital currency, central banks, this is what's going to come out almost 100 years after fractional reserve banking was introduced. So there is a cycle, there's a changing of the guard always. There's patterns that you can identify, but this creates an incredible opportunity for us all. Because once the system, to transform, the system has to start destroying parts of itself and start peeling back so it can build anew. And when they offer the solutions to us all, this gives us an incredible opportunity to say, no, we don't want that. We don't want the transhuman world. Cycles of time. What is the apocalypse? As I said, you know, many cultures on earth have explored this concept. How do we know the cycles of time? How do we know these things? And almost in every case, if you study them, the end is never really the end, is it? Whether it's Buddhism, even the Christian philosophies, they believe, you know, in Revelation, stick true and you will be born in a new heaven. You just can't submit to the will of the state, which is represented by, you know, the Lucifer in this sense, you know. All different types of religion talk about there's a new beginning. The end just signifies the beginning of something new. And so this is the opportunity of a lifetime for us to ensure that we have some purpose in the future moving forward, to ensure that our community stays strong, because in the future, all of these ideas will not be allowed. All of these concepts that we're talking about will be forbidden in a sense. And we will have to navigate through that period. We can't be so naive to think that the world won't give us challenges. We're not just going to evolve willy-nilly with no challenges. Like, I don't think that's the way the world works. But who are they ultimately? If you really pull back the layers, you might even find that, again, this is a part of the exact same matrix, the exact same realm that we live in. It's just a part of that coding. There's not even a they. It's just designed as a challenge for you so you can evolve better. And I think that this is what we should be focusing on in the future, because so many people question things, but they get themselves stuck into the fact that it's going to happen to me, it's going to happen to us. But we've been given the eyes to see so that we can avoid that. And I'm sure everyone here is the same. You've got certain numbers that have drawn you to things. You've had certain events that have woken you up. You might not have paid attention in school, little things like that. You might have not really resonated with these things. You might have had a family member that went into the medical industry that revealed the horrors to you. You might have went into a workplace and started to become successful and then realised, oh, is this really how the world works? And there's something always during that moments where we realise that what we were trapped in is no longer relevant. We need to evolve past that and we need to step outside of that. And this was the catalyst to transform us. So we've all gone through that. And now it's just about preserving the way that we think, finding purpose because everyone has a role to play, and just ensuring that this type of thing survives, ensuring that we track the cycles and we know that everything's going to be all right if you can just stay one step ahead of the plans. And I think it's obvious for that reason. You know, people talk to me about why it's so obvious that some of these events are fake and some of these narratives are fake, and for me it just seems like things are so obvious because it's meant there. It's almost a litmus test for everyone, and not everyone sees what we see, you know. People look at the moon landing module and think, oh my God, that went to the moon. And we're looking at little tin foil around like curtain hangers going, what? Oh my God. But it wasn't until this time period that I actually thought what that actually meant, you know, once you peel it back. Like, why do I laugh at that? Why do we laugh at that, but others? And it's almost put there, you know. Can't you see the joke too? We see the joke. We get it. And so I think that, yeah, through the doom and gloom there is, you know, the doom and gloom doesn't necessarily need to suck everyone down, because I truly believe that we're not a part of that step that is going downwards. We're going in a progressive forward motion to something better. Now for me, as I said, my purpose is sort of documenting what's happening, so that's why I do talk about what's happening in the world and try to do good news. But it's not because I'm fixated on the negatives and scared that this is going to happen. I believe that we've been given the tools to navigate this time, and it is the opportunity of a lifetime for us to say, we don't want that on the left. We don't want augmented reality, virtual reality world. We don't want to be sucked into some hyper-real simulation where we don't really know what reality is. We want to experience our true selves and our true potential in this world. And without sort of understanding these sort of deeper concepts, you might find yourself in a constant loop of either it's fear or anxiousness, what have you. But there's definitely bigger concepts here, there's bigger keys for us to see, but I really am harping on about preservation a lot, because as someone that was born, I'm a 90s baby, I see my generation, and it's not good. A lot of them are, I don't even know how to say it, you see it everywhere. Addicted to pornography, selling their bodies online, addicted to the smartphones, addicted to fast foods and terrible things for them. There's no such thing as a morality anymore in the sexual realm. There's no restriction, there's no morals. And this is the generation that's calling out for what's on the left there. This is the generation that's going to go into this trap, and I guess our role is almost to stand on the side and start creating a new world. And when these people are ready to wake up, they will seek us. But we have to have that new world there ready for them to come to. Otherwise, they're going to be trapped in this continuous virtual matrix where I don't think they'll ever understand what real was ever again. And you can argue that we don't even understand what real is now, and we've already gone through this process before. And maybe that's why we're ready as well, because we've been put here for these constant cycles, for this constant change. So I explore all of these options, but I see that the younger generations are definitely succumbing to this brave new world order agenda. They will be the happy epsilons of the future, but in Brave New World, there's very powerful scenes in there. Huxley lets us know. There's one scene in the book where he tries to, John the Savage, who comes from the savage world, the savage reservations, he tries to awaken the epsilons. He goes and smashes all of their soma medicine that keeps them drugged up and in a state of perpetual bliss so that they don't know what's going on. He breaks it, and you know what happens? All of those epsilons rebel against him. They get angry because he's taken away their medicine. And so I don't even think it's necessarily about awakening people anymore. People will awaken on their own. And we can hold the door open for them and say, you can join us in this room, but we're not going to force you into this room anymore. I've got to focus on the people that are in this room. I can't spend my energy being out there pushing you into the room if you don't want to come in here. So we leave that option open, but for us we need to focus on what the new world looks like and how we're going to do that. And I think preservation, ensuring that we have a purpose and we fulfill our soul purpose, whatever it is, we do that. I've sort of talking about mine and my journey, and trying to just hold that door open for people and create a world and make sure that this information lasts. So thank you for listening. I appreciate your time.